Good evening. Good evening to the folks in the balcony as well. My name is Gretchen Hathaway. I'm the Dean of Diversity and Inclusion for the campus and the Chief Diversity Officer. We are starting a new set of forums, and the forum will be about constructive engagement, really engaging in conversations that may be uncomfortable for some and enlightening for others. This idea came from the first day that our president stepped on campus, for those who were at the inauguration. And on that day, he talked about constructive engagement, and we have really done a great job of defining what that means and how we're going to move forward having these kinds of conversations. I'm delighted to welcome you all here, and I'm loving the fact that members of our Sikh community and our Jewish community have really taken upon themselves to come and be here and engage in this conversation. The guidelines will be, this is a dialogue, not a debate. We aim to create an open space without judgment, so you can share things that were talked about at your dining room table that you normally wouldn't share when you walked out the kitchen door. We ask that you use I statements, as opposed to saying, you said this and I'm not happy with that, saying things like, I felt uncomfortable when you said this. Can you explain that further? It's much more constructive to talk in that manner. Be an active listener and a participant, so I'm asking folks, put down your phones. Share the airtime. That means allowing others to have ask a question or to respond to a question. So we're going to share the airtime. We only have a limited amount of time, and we want a lot of folks to be able to be engaged. Whenever possible, seek common ground and understanding. And in the end, we will probably have folks who will agree to disagree, and that's okay. So that's really the principles and the guidelines for our constructive engagement dialogue, and I hope you will enjoy it. It is my pleasure to now introduce you to the person who really had the insight, not just to bring forward that terminology. In the 70s, constructive engagement meant a whole different thing for me. And really articulating what we need to do that. And in actuality, we were starting to have those kinds of conversations. Now we have it as part of our strategic plan, really moving forward to have these kind of dialogues. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you President of Union College, David Harris.
Thank you, Gretchen. Thanks, Gretchen, and thank all of you for being here. I am just blown away by the turnout. This was so exciting to see, not on only the lower level, but the upper levels here at the beautiful Knott Memorial. There were tragic events in California at a synagogue this weekend. All too sadly, there are tragic events, it seems like just about every week in our society, with gun violence. And for me, this event, this particular event, starts 6 months and 2 days ago, I guess it is, at the tragic shooting at the synagogue in Pittsburgh. Because that happened, and I was walking around later, listening to All Things Considered on NPR, Morning Edition, one of those two shows, and I heard about these two guys. I heard about which I knew, the shooting of the Sikh temple in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in August 2012, but I heard about this group and this unlikely pairing. And at that point I thought, I would love to get them here to Union College. I'd love to complement what we do as a college in the classroom with the experiential, with hearing about their story, about hate, about how someone gets into these hate movements and engages in reprehensible acts, how someone reforms from this, but also about how someone reacts when his friends, family members are struck down by hate in the way they have done this. And so I'm really excited that Pardeep and Arno have come, spent time with us during Common Hour today and some other time throughout the day with our community. So we're going to have a conversation briefly up here. I'll guide the conversation, and we're open up for Q&A. So be ready when we turn the microphones, open those up for you. I'll introduce them and call them to the stage, but first, I want to start with a video. For those of you who haven't had a chance to read the book, I strongly encourage you. It's really an amazing story, and there's books in the back. They'll be signing later. Here's a brief video which will give you a sense of what brought these two guys together and what they've been doing. So we start the video.
I was in a number of white power bands during the 7 years that I was involved in hate groups, the last of which was named Centurion, and we were very popular.
We must secure the existence of our race and the future of white children.
As a band, our objective in Centurion was to literally cultivate violence, and we did that with horribly violent, racist lyrics. Today, I'm humiliated by the things I screamed in Centurion and by the music that we made and the harm that it's done to the world, but it helps my practice because I was there, I can understand kids who are that angry today.
Arno was a very fine employee, and so were his three friends who were all skinheads. We were one of the only companies that would employ the skinheads at that time.
And there was one day when I'm at lunch in the break room and I'm kind of just like collapsed in the corner in this miserable heap, and I got this raging hangover, and I like reek of beer. And a guy I worked with named Lonnie, he was a black guy, he was well aware that I was this aspiring racist. But this one day, he saw me in the corner there and he's like, "Hey, skinhead, you want to have this sandwich? You look hungry."
We've seen with Arno and his friends how much they can change. You wouldn't think they could change that much, but it's astounding.
Those acts of kindness, that Jack's kindness, that Lonnie's kindness, like led me to a point where I was literally looking for an excuse to leave the movement. And that if it weren't for those acts of kindness, I may never have.
Our paths crossed very genuinely. There was no idea of like, okay, we should do this, we should speak on this, and we should, form this movement doing this.
Like, and it felt like we had been friends our whole lives and just kind of went and hung out for squash curry one Monday night.
Sometimes we're searching and we need somebody to help us out. I needed somebody to show me, a different way, a different path, and Arno definitely did that.
On paper, we could not have been more different, but as we talked, we were so similar. That it really kind of defined our mission from that day forward, which was to celebrate the fact that human beings have far more in common than different, no matter what. I think it's really exciting to think of the impact that Battle for Humanity will have. It makes like a game and a mission out of these same kind of small, innocuous acts of kindness. This is like something that really can transform a human life, not only for the person on the receiving end of these gifts, but especially for the person who's giving them.
Thank you. So I was going to introduce Arno and Pardeep, more of a long introduction, but I think instead I'm just going to introduce them the way we did it earlier today with the students, by having them tell their story. So Arno and Pardeep, I welcome you to the stage. Thank you again for being with us here today at Union College. I want to start with the before. So, Pardeep, I wonder if you might give us just a little brief background. You said you were born in India, moved here at age 6, so just a little bit about your family story in America before that day in August of 2012.
Sure. And it's an honor to be here, you guys. Sat Shri Akal, Namaste, Salam, Shalom, good evening. And it's beautiful to see so many diverse faces. My journey into this country, I was 6 years old when we immigrated. We immigrated to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which in the 80s had a lot of push-pull factors. And just bringing immigrants in, and we had a very thriving community. And so when we got here, we arrived from a small village in Punjab named Dugal. Both of my parents were farmers, My mom and dad did not graduate college. In fact, my mom had only gone to, she had only completed 5th grade. And you know, one of the things that I got to bring back and really ask her when we were doing this book was, how did you feel, Mom, when you came to America? And one of the words that she said was like, it just felt, everything felt so big and overwhelming. And I think about that, and I think about the courage that not only she and my dad had, but immigrants have in general, to leave the only place that they know, not a lot of money, not a lot of education, but just trust that they will be able to build a better life for their children than they were given. And we were definitely given that sense of appreciation when we came to the States in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. With that said, there wasn't a lot of opportunity given to a man who wore a turban and barely spoke English, and to a woman who barely spoke English and only had a 5th grade education. So my father's first job was working at a gas station for a friend of his, and he worked that morning, day, night, typically like long shifts, just kind of working and then really scratching and clawing. Eventually, he would scratch and claw his way to have his own business and sort of start to make his place, his small place, within the American dream that he visualized going forward. Small mom and pop shop. He put me and my brother through college. I became the first one to graduate from a university, Marquette University, and I started. And after that, I became a police officer. I became a police officer in the inner city of Milwaukee. I did that for about 5 years, and the area that I was policing really was one of the hardest hit as jobs in Milwaukee started to leave Milwaukee. In Milwaukee, we had this sort of like job exodus with good blue-collar paying jobs leaving the state. And when that happened, that left an opening for sort of the illegal and sort of the illegal market, I'll say it like that. And with that said, Milwaukee really started to take a turn for the worst, and for the worst for everybody. Right now, there's a documentary about the area that I used to police. It's called 53206. The documentary is really about the highest incarceration rate for black males in the United States, this little neighborhood. That's where I was policing. It was never lost on me the why of what was going on. But in a way, I was kind of just, ignoring it and saying, oh, I'll just keep policing and doing my job, and I'll keep good people safe by locking up bad folks. And I really think that we just thought that it was just that simple. As police officers, we're saying, let's just lock up bad folks and keep good people safe. Over 5 years, that complication of the gray got too much for me to stomach, so I became a teacher. And I started to teach at-risk high school youth in that same neighborhood. And that's what I was doing. And even when I was policing, I would say a little bit of me was really stuck on this I can fix this mentality, meaning I can help these poor, unfortunate youth, and I can help fix whatever they're going through. What I started to discover in my years of teaching was that these students who were going through some of the most difficult life circumstances ended up actually helping me and fixing me, because I saw in them the strength and resolve that only a child could have. And that was what happened when August of 2012 happened. I was lucky and fortunate because I had the ability to serve these youth who were able to embody strength and resilience. And that was the summer of August 5th, 2012.
So let's talk about the pre, we'll talk about then, and then talk about what you've done since. So Arno, as we saw in the video, you were involved in white supremacist skinhead movement, late 80s and 90s, and talk to us a little bit about, how did you end up in this? I mean, is this something your parents were sort of teaching you? I mean, how did this happen?
My childhood was very much like the polar opposite of parties. I think that's what makes our book, The Gift of Our Wounds, so interesting. It's these alternating experiences of two boys who grew up on opposite sides of the planet Earth. As hard as Pardeep's family worked to achieve the American dream. Like, I was born with the American dream handed to me on a silver platter. And I spent my entire life scraping and clawing to get away from it. I grew up in a suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin called Mequon. It's very well-to-do, very conservative, predominantly white. Looking back, and now that I've had the fortune to travel and work with people from all over the world, I understand that there are literally like billions of children who would feel like they won the lottery to switch childhoods with me. But from my perspective growing up, I was like the poor kid in Mequon. Like, give you an idea what the poor kid in Mequon is like, I always got jealous of my friends who went to Disney World in Hawaii every summer, and all I got to do was go up north to my dad's cabin. Like, that's rough. That's how bad I had it as a kid. My childhood was pretty idyllic. From the outside, everything looked great. We had a nice house, nice neighborhood. My parents were together. They both loved me very much. They let me know that all the time. As a matter of fact, all the adults in my life would just fawn over me as a kid. He's so wonderful. He's such a gifted genius. He can do anything. And it was something I was never really comfortable with. And because underneath the surface, my father's alcoholism put a lot of pressure on my mother to sometimes work 2 jobs to keep the bills paid and the lights on in our nice house in a nice neighborhood, I was suffering also. To see how my mother suffered every day and how stressed out she was, how miserable she was. My father wasn't abusive, he was a fun drunk. Like, when Dad was drunk, we were gonna shoot guns and light off fireworks. Like, that's fun for a kid. But his drinking put a lot of pressure on my mom financially. Their relationship's horrible. They fought all the time. And I responded to that not by saying, hey, Mom, I love you. How can I help? But just by distancing myself from her and from my dad, who loved me very much, despite the disease he struggled with. He was doing the best he could. And of course, as I distanced myself from the people who could help me, my suffering became worse, and I started hurting other kids. So I was a bully on the school bus in kindergarten, started to get a kick out of causing trouble, and like, oh, how far can I push this teacher today? How much can I disrupt the school bus tomorrow? And it was almost like an addiction. There's a lot of parallels to substance abuse, and one of them is like, I'm an alcoholic as well, so I know the first time I drank beer when I was 14 years old, I drank till I passed out, and I drank like that for another 20 years. And it probably took me 5-6 beers to do that, whereas when I quit drinking, I was drinking 18 beers a night, and I could still function the next day. So whatever substance you're addicted to, that amount that gets you high the first time doesn't get you high 10 times later. So my antisocial behavior as a kid kept escalating. I went from being a bully on the school bus, fights in the schoolyard, breaking and entering, vandalism, started drinking when I was 14. By the time I'm 16, I'm a full-blown alcoholic. I'm very familiar with violence. I've been violent since I was a little kid. It's second nature to me. And hate is just like another part of the rush. So that's who I was when I heard white power skinhead music. That was fast and aggressive, like the punk music that I was into for years beforehand. And I still love punk. I never want to make it sound like punk is some kind of gateway drug to becoming a white power skinhead. But to me, punk was just about breaking things and making people angry and shocking people and repulsing people. And nothing repulses people like a swastika. Mm-hmm. I wasn't ignorant as to why. In fact, I knew full well that the Holocaust was why people were repulsed by a swastika. But in the same way that a heroin junkie will know that it's wrong to steal things and sell them to get heroin, they're going to do it anyway because they don't care about anything but getting that heroin. For me, I didn't care about anything but getting that fix of repulsing civil society, and that's what drew me into white supremacist skinhead gangs.
And it's it's an excellent read, the book. So we don't have time to go into all the detail, but could you give sort of the short version of what people always ask, which is, so how'd you get out?
Right.
What led you out? And I know it's, as we said, it's not like one thing happened and you switched.
Sure.
So.
It's interesting because I'm a Buddhist today, and there's all kinds of different Buddhists. Like, some are into mystical stuff, and I'm more into just scientific things. But it could be said that it was an act of God that led me out, because all these things had to fall into place. And what it was all these different elements that build the exhaustion of living in fear of all your fellow human beings. So I knew what I was doing was wrong, for one. I knew it was wrong to hurt people, it was wrong to hate people, and I didn't have the courage to even acknowledge that inner voice, much less answer it. That took a ton of energy to deny constantly, so that was exhausting. I had to cut myself off from the rest of society. When you adhere to a fundamentalist, violent extremist ideology, all of the things you take for granted, all the pop culture, all the TV, the sports, the film, the music, and I've been a geek for these things my whole life and still am. I can no longer root for the Green Bay Packers because it's a bunch of black guys and white guys on the same team. I can't watch movies out of Hollywood. It's all part of the Jewish plot to kill all the white people. Sure can't watch Seinfeld on TV. I can't listen to music that's not white power. And so that's exhausting because I've always been kind of a curious, arts-driven person, and now I can't enjoy that stuff. But what was most exhausting was when people who I claimed to hate treated me with kindness. As mentioned in the video, it got back to my mom, who went to high school with Jack. And she asked him to give me a job when I dropped out of school after sophomore year. He's like, sure. It got back to my mom that I'm wearing swastikas into his factory and trying to recruit all the white guys I work with and running my mouth about my racist beliefs every day at work. And my mom called Jack in tears because Jack's Jewish. And my mom was just like, I would understand if you fired my son. I'd fire him if I were you. And rather than fire me, Jack just said, he's a good kid. He's just going through a phase. And so here I am saying that Jews are the scum of the earth and everything wrong with the world is their fault, when in reality, the only Jew I really know and interact with on a regular basis is a very kind man who gives me a means to support myself and hired my skinhead buddies, despite me doing one of the most offensive things you can do to a Jewish person, which is wave a swastika in their face. So that kindness indicated how wrong I was in a very powerful way. And it, after 7 years, it just built up until I could no longer cope with this exhaustion anymore. And so the excuse I was looking for to leave was in 1994, my girlfriend and I broke up. Go figure, but hate and violence and alcohol is not a recipe for a healthy relationship between a man and a woman. Remember that, kids. And I found myself a single parent to our 18-month-old daughter. And a couple months after that, a second friend of mine was murdered in a street fight. And by that time, I had lost count of how many of my friends had been incarcerated. And so it finally hit me that if I didn't leave, death or prison was going to take me from my daughter.
And I want to bridge now back to the events in August. But by way of bridging, I just think it's important for people to realize that although, Arno, you were not directly involved in the shooting at the temple, you actually were part of what led to it indirectly. And you and your group was not just spouting hate, not to minimize,
right,
but actually involved in physical assaults and inspiring people with music and so forth.
If we weren't sitting around making this music, we were out in the streets attacking people. I've beaten people, left them for dead with my bare hands. And that'll haunt me to my grave, and it should.
And so that's the kind of activity that was going on, and then leads to the day in August. And I know, again, you were, your mom and your dad were both to the temple that day. You were, I think I read that your family was on the way, and then I could identify with this. I think you were upset with your daughter, I guess, had forgotten something?
Yeah, she'd forgotten a notebook at the house. So we had to turn back around and waste about 10 minutes. And that 10 minutes was what saved our lives. And as me and Arnold have shared our stories and journeys, I think that has stuck out to a lot of people where they have described a situation when you're like, oh, I should have been there, or I could have been there, or I was running late to something. And oftentimes I tell my daughter now, sometimes she worries about being late to things, and I'm like, whatever time we get there, we'll get there. And that time will be perfect. So you are where you're supposed to be at any given moment. Right now we're here, and this is perfection.
Right. So let me, because I want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions from the audience, so let me just sort of, in this phase, let's talk a little about how you end up, together. So there's a tragic shooting at the temple. 6 people are killed, including your dad. Yeah. So how do you end up meeting Arno? Sort of, how does that happen? And what led you to say not, I have hate for all these skinheads, people who commit the act, inspire, and so forth, but I want to reach out and get to know someone who's walked that path.
Yeah. So when we think about Dharma, we think about duty. And the Dharma can be seen as different things, as like a path, a duty, a life, a purpose. Our duty begins a long time before we actually think that it began. We think that we just, become, well, congratulations on becoming president of Union College. And sometimes we think that that's what our duty is. But that started a long time ago. And we were able to share kind of your journey and how that became into fruition. But my journey that day, with my daughter forgetting that notebook, and as that day progressed, there was a lot of things that didn't leave my psyche. And much to like speak about like Arnold, all these things happening at the right time with the right people was very much my life that day. And before that, I will never forget how many people showed up from their different congregations that day. People were getting out of their places of worship. And they knew that they couldn't go home, but they also didn't know the culture of Sikhi. But what they knew was, I just need to show up there. I need to be next to my fellow human beings. And I could see people kind of looking at one another, not knowing what to say or how to say it, but then they spoke that universal language of empathy. It was like they were looking at it in sadness and tragedy, and I could just see that. And I was witnessing in real time of, hey, I'm worried about all these things happening. I'm worried about people being alive inside. But I'm watching a greater human family come together because of it. And that has never, since then, that has never stopped. And we are here today. And even, as I progress and tell you a little bit about that day, as I was trying to find out what was happening inside the Gurdwara, I asked a very unlikely person. I asked a child who was inside the Gurdwara at the time. And I asked her, I said, did you see, do you know who I am? Do you know my father? Have you seen him? And she says, yes, I have, and I saw him. When did you last see him? Oh, he was inside the room, the same room that her father was in. And her father passed as well. And I said, I wanted to know my dad's last words. And she says to me, she says, your dad, as I was hiding in the bathroom, was saying, Vaheguru, Vaheguru, Vaheguru. Now, Gopal Singh knows what Vaheguru means. Well, Vaheguru basically is, some people think it's a call out to, say, a higher power. But it's actually a call out and a call in. It's to say, I want to be connected. At this moment and this place, I want to be connected with you, whatever you is. Right? And I was at peace because I got to find that, he got to pray. He got to pray for himself. And then I went back to this story of immigrants and these people coming here with little money in their pockets, little education, right? And really making a life for themselves and their kids that was better than a life for them back home. And I thought about my father and I said, my dad didn't do anything for himself. And then I knew it. I knew that he didn't say that for him, but he basically said that for us. He said that for us to be the continuation of his spirit. And so did 5 other souls. So did the person that last left in your lifetime. The last words out of somebody, this is, you can read the documentary of Gandhi or anyone else, Martin Luther King Jr., the last thing that they say is often a prayer. This is the most purposeful prayer that anyone can say. And I know that tonight you're like, you know what, we're going to go to this thing. Somebody dragged you along. Maybe Gretchen called you and said, hey, come to show up. Right? But really, you are an answer to that prayer. You are a continuation of that prayer. And so thank you for showing up. And as we talk to everyone as we go forward, continue to show. Continue to keep coming. And we might not know what to say, what to do, but we have those guidelines. And we might disagree, agree, whatever. Let's just keep working together. And I think that we can get to a better place.
Excellent. Thank you, Pardeep. There's so much more, but I'm going to turn over the questions to the audience. I've had the privilege of talking with them during the day, but if there are questions people have for Pardeep and Arno. Yeah, I see over here in the corner. If you'd identify, give your name if you would.
Sure. Hi, my name is Tatiana Lynn. I'm actually from Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, which is like 15, 20 minutes away from Milwaukee. And so I was just wondering if you have any advice for the city of Milwaukee in general to like end the cycle of hate and segregation and violence that goes on there, because I know it's close to all of our hearts.
Yeah. So I've been, great question. So the city of Milwaukee, advice for the city of Milwaukee. I think there's a lot of good that's happening in Milwaukee, and I think there's a lot of phenomenal leaders who are in Milwaukee that are really ushering in a new future that is really about healing. We got a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of reform that we need to have happen within the criminal justice field, within the way that we look at incarceration, policy issues, and then there's so many different policy issues, from housing to employment to whatever. But I think what we need to do is have a spiritual understanding that like we need to set a foundation, and this foundation needs to be one of healing rather than hurting. And I think for too long, Milwaukee, I love Milwaukee, but and I hear this from people that go back to Milwaukee, is that as soon as you kind of fly back into Milwaukee, there's this sinking feeling, and you almost like are relieved to leave town and then come back in Milwaukee. And I think just the advice is just to embrace healing.
Milwaukee is the most segregated city in the United States for many years running. And the conditions in the inner city are crushing. We've done a lot of work in the inner city of Milwaukee. We've also done a lot of work on the south side of Chicago, the west side of Chicago. And people, like activists, would come up from Chicago to visit Milwaukee and just be like, ooh, like you guys really are facing some trouble up here. And I think if I could give advice to Milwaukee, like what we need to do is like understand that we're all in this together. What happens to people in the inner city affects everybody else, and vice versa. We have to actively defy this segregation, and we've been very honored to do that through our Serve to Unite program. The first two schools that we worked with were Westside Academy in the core of Milwaukee's inner city, 35th and Lisbon, and the other one was Fernwood Montessori in Bayview, which is a much more posh area, and the schools were symptomatic of that segregation. Westside was 99% black students. There was a couple Asian and Latino kids that went there. There wasn't a single white kid that went to that school. Fernwood is about 80% white, and the other 20% is kind of a diverse mix. And our program brought those young people together to work hand in hand to address issues like gun violence, like police community relations, like segregation, like homelessness, human trafficking. And that work, like rolling up your sleeves and solving a problem with someone, you start to really connect. That's constructive engagement. Like you connect with that person as a human being, and that's when people in the suburbs starts to realize like this is unacceptable, that children face these challenges 3 miles away from where I live. I need to do something about that. That's what needs to happen in Milwaukee, and I think it is happening. We're going to continue to make it happen.
Thanks. Yeah. Hold on a second. Microphones so these people online can hear.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. My name is Daniel Mosquera. I'm teaching the Department of Modern Languages here at Union. I have a question for Arno, but also for both of you, because you spoke about kind of feeling gradually segregated and isolated as you were dealing with your increasing rage and found in white supremacist spaces and experiences kind of meaningful connections. But I wonder whether you can speak also to all of the different ways in which directly and indirectly white supremacy is nurtured without violence. I'm talking about like the different structures of dismantling international education, removing the analysis of other people's histories as they connect and intersect with the US because they're troubling for this homogeneous myth about the nation, as an example. Also, different kinds of music, all kinds of different popular kind of expressions that indirectly also sustain that kind of ideology. And so I wonder whether you can speak to that, because we cannot expect, I imagine, empathy to emerge only in the context of tragedy, that we really want to build an empathy and a proximity that is nourished through daily life of people coming together in all kinds of different situations. And so I'm just wondering if you can speak to that. Thank you.
That's an awesome question. You made some great points. And those are things that not enough people understand and contemplate and listen to. In my case, one of the first things that came to mind as you're asking that question is, a lot of people are like, why aren't you in prison? Like, were you ever incarcerated? And a lot of my friends were incarcerated, but in my case, I was arrested time after time after time. And I never sat in jail longer than a couple weeks. And part of that is because of my dumb luck, but a big part of it is because I was a white kid. There is no way that a child of color would have done anywhere near the same things I had done and not been sent to prison for life. That's just the way that this incarceration system works. And that absolutely bolsters white supremacy, because you have this cycle, like in places like the inner city of Milwaukee, where 1 out of 3 black men is either dead or in prison, and the leadership of those communities is being diminished generation after generation, while kids in Mequon grow up to become bankers and doctors and lawyers, and they continue to hold and maintain the trappings of power. So those things absolutely do happen. And I agree with you entirely that we need to really start seeing diversity as the asset it is, without having to be prompted by an atrocity. Pardeep and I do a lot of work in the corporate realm. We just got back from a talk at Facebook HQ in Menlo Park. I've spoken at Google. We've visited Twitter, other large corporations, and I think it's a very good thing nowadays that business is seeing the case for diversity. In fact, pretty much any Fortune 500 company is going to have a diversity and inclusion officer nowadays. So it's something where a lot more attention is being paid than it has been before. And it's up to us to not only maintain that attention, but increase it and make the case for why diversity solves problems, and how diversity is just a healthier way for human society to be. I believe it's our natural state. If you look at any other ecosystem, a coral reef, a rainforest, like any zoologist or biologist will tell you that the health of that ecosystem is measured by its diversity. If there's too much of one species and not enough of another, the whole ecosystem gets out of whack. And I believe that's very true for human society as well. And Pardeep and I have been fortunate to do that work, and we're excited about continuing to do it as well.
Thanks. Questions in the back?
First, just want to say thank you guys for sharing your story today. It's been very eye-opening. Arno, I had a question. So in this day and age, and especially in the climate we have, you talked about coming from, a place of privilege, where you grew up and stuff. And I think there's nothing more powerful than, when somebody from a place of privilege is an ally to those kind of underrepresented and marginalized in our society. So, for us and for anybody else listening, can you tell us a little bit about how people kind of in a place of privilege can use that to be an ally to people who necessarily don't have that, and how they can kind of spread the knowledge to, other people like them who, may say, hey, I don't believe that, but they also stay silent and don't stand up for people, and they think they might be supporting something, but their silence is almost, speaking louder than that. So if you could just talk a little bit about, being an ally and tips people could use to be better at that.
That's an excellent point. I think it's super important. I'm a big fan of Occam's razor. It's a philosophical exercise, breaking something down to its simplest form. And our society needs to have all kinds of conversations about privilege and about oppression and white supremacy and patriarchy heteronormativity and all sorts of issues like that. But I think what's getting in our way is that before we have those conversations nowadays, we're not doing the legwork. We're not laying the foundation to really have constructive conversations. And so if we just get a room full of white people together and we tell them how privileged they are and how they need to be allies without like establishing their common humanity with everybody else, all you're going to get is the defensive, what people like to call white fragility. That's because you're not starting from that foundation. And so to me, the most important work is establishing that foundation of common humanity so that we can have healthy learning, growing, healing discussions about issues of privilege. I think when we see ourselves in others, then that's when, if I see you being mistreated, that's unacceptable to me because you're my brother. But if I don't start from that place, then why do I care? It's kind of been there's a lot of great things about this country. I'm a patriot. I love the United States of America, but it's also, there's been a lot of dark things. And one of them is the kind of like, well, I got mine. You pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And that's kind of been the American way as much as anything else. And it's that kind of attitude, which has been very prevalent, that we need to start breaking that down and getting across to people that we're all in this together before we can start talking about really challenging things like privilege, like oppression, things like that. So I make the case, if I'm doing intervention work and I have somebody in the movement nowadays, what I tell them is I'm like, look, buddy, I've been where you've been for 7 years. I've said everything you have to say 1,000,000 times over, probably better than you'll ever say it. What I challenge them is, I say, you don't live the life that I live now. You don't know what it's like to go. I go all the places that these guys are terrified to go, and I'm perfectly comfortable doing it. I'm not only comfortable, I'm joyful, and I'm grateful because I look and I see family everywhere I look. And they're the ones who are leaving that all on the table. They're voluntarily living in fear of their fellow human beings. And I think even if you're not talking about a rabid white supremacist, a skinhead, somebody wearing a Klan outfit, there is all these underlying factors in our society where those feelings are there without the latent display of it. And so that message needs to be cultivated and propagated to everyone so that we can have those kind of discussions.
As you alluded to, part of the work you do now is actually sometimes with people who are contemplating getting out of the white supremacist movement.
Exactly.
Trying to counsel them.
We do, Serve United is very much violent extremist prevention, but we do intervention as well. And all the same dynamics come into play.
So Jim in the back.
I'm Jim Underwood. I've been here.
Hold on a second, Jim.
I'm Jim Underwood. I've been here for a long time. The only thing I haven't done is be a student, which is a handicap, by the way. I've listened to everything, and it's very educational. I think oftentimes a diversity officer becomes a symbolic thing and only a symbolic thing. I think the first thing to realize is that we've had affirmative action for white males since the beginning of the country. Certainly had it. Second thing is that a dominant group never gives up a dominant position easily. Never, never, never. And we've had affirmative action for white males since the beginning of the country. And I'm not saying that we need to get rid of that dominant position by violence, necessarily. And I think that people resist thinking that white males have had affirmative action forever. And I think that getting rid of affirmative action for white males is a very, very difficult thing because there will be incredible resistance. And so we have to start with getting over to people the idea that we've had affirmative action for white males forever. And so to remove them from that position means that they have to be removed from that position vis-a-vis women and vis-a-vis people of color. And this is going to be inch by hard inch. And we see it every day. We see it on television every day. We see it, and a woman came forth and accused Justice Kavanaugh, potential Justice Kavanaugh, but we see it in very small things. We see it if we go back to the 1940s, and men laughed when women said they were going to drive cars. It's in small things like that women accepted then, in a whole range of small things, and then bigger things, and then bigger things. So this is an enormous task, because dominant groups never give up easily. So it's a battle that people have to fight every day.
Thanks, Jim. Let me just sort of build off that and sort of ask each of you just briefly. I see a lot of hands, which is great. So you're doing work and trying to address what Jim was talking about, is trying to get folks to give up some of their privilege. I wonder if just Arno, Pardeep, just briefly, is sort of what are one or two things you find really successful in your work with folks, and what's something that people might think works that really doesn't work very well?
Yeah, I think one of the things that works, and really like what we did, was I wasn't really thinking about white people giving up their privilege. I wasn't even thinking about white people coming to like save us. I wasn't thinking, I was just like, you know what? Let's just show how great Sikhi is. Let's show how great Islam is. Let's show how great something is. And it's not like, I think sometimes from a dominant lens, people start to say, well, you know what? I need to step back so that you can step forward. And I'll tell you, like most people of color that I know will be like, no, you don't need to step back. I'm stepping up anyways. If you look at my CV, you'll be like, man, like this is his CV. And I told somebody before, I said, I got to do more. I got to do so much more than the other person has to do. And they were white, and they were like, why do you got to do that? And I'm like, because we just have to do more. So my daughter has to get straight A's. She has to have a PhD. She has to have the same thing just to be considered. And I'm going to make sure that happens. And I don't know I know a lot of successful people of color who are just like, you know what, we're up to the challenge. What you will hear in media is not that same thing. It'll be like, well, we need affirmative action to give you a chance. No, you don't. We'll give ourselves a chance, but give us a fair chance. That's all we're asking for. When I go to, I graduated from one of the top universities. I applied at 20 different police departments in the city, around the city of Milwaukee. I got a call back from 2. This was at a time when all you needed to become a police officer was you need a 2-year degree, or you needed a high school degree, and you were going to work towards a 2-year degree. I had a 4-year degree from a top-tier university, no criminal records, had worked my entire life, had worked for the DA's office, like all this experience, but yet didn't get a chance. Maybe it's because they saw Pardeep Kalika on the top of that resume and said, do I see him as part of my corporate culture in policing? So I think there's a lot of implicit biases that we have to address, and sadly, we have to address them explicitly.
The biggest issue I see nowadays, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody, is we're trying to solve a spiritual problem with political solutions. And again, it was kind of like your question earlier. It's like, we got to have these discussions about privilege and oppression, but if we're not in a spiritual place to have them, then we're just going to butt heads politically. And so I've never seen that be successful. And as far as the issues with dominant groups, the only way to fix that without just like perpetuating a cycle of domination is getting everybody on the same page that like we're in this together. The way I look at all of this is like every single one of the almost 8 billion human beings on this planet, we're all like riding around the universe in the same spaceship, and our life support systems are failing. And we're in the spaceship like arguing over who's sitting where, when the whole thing is gonna fail like really soon. And if we don't all get on the same page and understand that what happens to one of us affects all of us because we're all part of the same organization, the same organism, then we really don't have a whole lot of chance of solving these problems.
Thanks, sir. Rabbi Cutler?
I'm Matt Cutler. I'm an area rabbi, and I'm leaving here to go actually to a vigil to deal with violence for what happened in a synagogue in San Diego. And so I'm going to pick up on that spiritual question that you started to raise and say, I need advice, I need counsel, because I'm going to be seeing a group of people that are angry, that are hurt, that are scared, and are grieving. And I don't know if this is the time to bridge things forward, but Dr. Upal and I are going to be standing shoulder to shoulder, and we're going to be looking for some counsel from you now on how we go forward.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, every time one of these tragedies happens, we have sort of a protocol. We get up in the morning. I get up in the morning, record a solidarity message, and really just block out the rest of the day to be able to answer media and put a brave face on for the world. I think you said something incredibly wise before, and saying, you know what, we can accept failure sometimes, and we can say, you know what, we haven't done enough, and maybe we can all say that. Maybe we can all say when it was time to go ahead and really reach out to that person who we don't agree with, whether politically, ideologically, whatever it was, we didn't do enough when we could have done enough. Maybe I haven't done enough. Maybe I have separated myself from certain people who have certain beliefs. And when it was time for me to step up and keep people safe, I didn't do that because I didn't have that crucial conversation. So in a way, allowing failure to be part of the healing. You two are incredibly strong men, leaders, and what they need from you is to represent more than yourself. And this is what we need from everybody. We need everybody to represent more than themselves. When Jesus was on the cross and he says, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do, on Luke 23:24, he was talking about, when he's speaking and he's talking about people, the Roman soldiers tearing up his clothes. He's talking about how divided we have become, and forgiveness being the only recipe that can bring us together. The ideal of forgiveness. Forgiveness not forgetting, but forgiveness being vengeance against the separation of those same clothes. And speak from your heart and speak from yourself, and they will know that you represent more than, not to say that you're not enough, but to know that you represent the ideal of forgiveness. And maybe they're feeling like they haven't done enough when they could have done enough, when people haven't said enough, when they could have said enough, when complacency was part of who they need, what they need forgiveness for. And you'll find the words when you need to find the words, and just trust in that. But thank you for that.
The last couple guys I worked with in an intervention setting to get them out of the movement were both veterans of the U.S. military, one of whom had been in active deployment for 13 years, 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was never in the military. I was like a paramilitary wannabe soldier in the movement days. I did a lot of rappelling off rocks and eating salamanders and shooting guns. But I'm not gonna pretend like I'm a vet. But working with these guys, I had to start thinking like them. So I started saying things like tactical and objective and operational. I'm thinking in military terms. And I think in both of your cases, you need to think in military terms as well. And in order to do that, you have to know your enemy. I'm a big fan of Sun Tzu's Art of War. In delicious irony, I read it while I was in the movement. An older white supremacist was like, you gotta read this book. And I'm like, isn't that by an Asian guy? And he's like, yeah, but read it, just read it. And I went, okay, and I read it then. And it actually made sense to me then, and I recently reread it just about a year ago. And the book has all kinds of really powerful wisdom in it, but the one that comes to mind is this, and Sun Tzu said something to the effect of, if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know one or the other, you'll lose half of them. If you don't know either, you'll never win a single battle. And so I consider our enemy to be these spiritual maladies that our brothers and sisters are stricken by, and not those human beings themselves. That's crucial. Is to, it's like blaming somebody who has cancer. You could have lung cancer. Maybe you got it from smoking, but like the disease of cancer is the target, not the person who is stricken by it. So with that objective in mind, understand what hatred wants to do. Hate wants to destroy your faith in humanity. And if you look at all these attacks on places of worship, regardless of what flavor of violent extremism committed the particular attack, the common thread is that every single one of those people, whether it's a suicide bomb, it's a shooting, it's whatever, they have utterly lost every bit of their faith in humanity, and they want to make sure everybody else loses faith in humanity also. So I think it's my job personally, and I would say it's your job as leaders of faith, and it's every one of our jobs, to say, no, we're not giving up our faith in humanity, ever. Like, hold on to that, and hold on to it like it's the fight of your life, because it is. This is what our society is coming down to, is whether or not we have faith that we can heal and progress through this, or we're going to consume each other before our spaceship self-destructs. That's up to us right now. So that faith in humanity is what our objective is, and we have to make sure that every move of ours is a tactical operation towards that objective.
See, here I saw, we're getting close to the time. I see 1, 2, 3, if we'll go fast, if we can try to, before I get the hook.
You were talking about acts of kindness. Do you feel like those are essential in order to like reform people that come from the type of background that you do? And if so, what happens when acts of kindness don't work?
It's a big question.
It's a great question. I'm not only a fan of Sun Tzu, I'm a big fan of the Dalai Lama, who famously said, if kindness doesn't work, try more kindness. And that's easy for me, the straight white guy, born with the American dream handed to me on a silver platter, to say. But the Dalai Lama has actually faced quite a bit of oppression, as have all the people of Tibet. And he says this not to be cute. He says it because it's a practical, it's a tactical operation for him. When people responded to my hostility with kindness, they were defying me. They were resisting me, because everything I did was meant to provoke hostility. So if somebody wants to come and like belt me in the mouth, they're putty in my hands. Whether or not I get beat up or I beat them up, like they are doing exactly what I'm trying to provoke from them. The people, like my boss, were like, no, I'm not letting you make the rules of engagement here. I'm making the rules. And the rules are this. This is how a human being treats another human being. That has the power to change the course of people's lives. Nobody was ever going to beat the Nazi out of me. I got beat up as often as I beat up other people. And at no point did violence ever make me less violent or less hateful. And I think it's like a law of physics. Violence can't be created or destroyed, it could only be transferred. And so if we're trying to solve a problem with violence, all we're going to do is we can maybe transform the state of violence from one of like active fighting to one of people behaving at gunpoint. But either way, that's a state of violence. To me, the only way you can interrupt a cycle of violence is with kindness. So it's a tactical act of rebellion to respond to hatred with kindness.
And just real quick, it's not kindness and compassion. Oftentimes we see it as something for somebody else. It's actually for you. It's a gift to you. It's basically I wish you stillness is what I would wish you. Don't move for anybody else. And that means that you keep yourself and you keep your power. And it's kindness and compassion and forgiveness are all about keeping your power. You don't move for that other person.
So Manesh and then Jack. Our last two questions, and we'll have a reception afterwards.
Pradeep and Arnold, thank you for being here. And I'm just live and work in the local community, so thanks to Union College for opening this up to the public as well. But the question I have for you is, as you've embarked on this journey over the last several years, how have there been instances where your own transformations have provoked different reactions from your own prior circles of life? And I lived in Milwaukee, my kids were born there, now I live here. But, and how have you dealt with that? Have there been reactions that are positive or not as positive, and how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, great question. And oftentimes, when you're going through the life, when people are going through their lives, right? Most everybody can understand this. A lot of people will be in your life for chapters. A few will be in your life for the entire book. And that's just the way that it goes. The more that you're going to progress down your life pattern, whatever that looks like, certain people are going to go on that journey with you. Some people can't go on that journey with you. Some people won't even understand your journey. And so therefore it will look almost foreign to them. And that's kind of what life has looked like. It has looked like, not because I want to, but just because that's the way that looked. That saying some of the things you say and the life pattern that you take, some people are not ready to go in that place. They might see you and say, well, it makes sense for you, but it doesn't make sense for me because I'm harboring ill feelings towards that person. Well, then stay with that person then. And they don't, not that they want that, not that they want let that person consume space in their mind. But until you let go of that, you can't get to another place.
And just to build on that, just as we talked before, it's not as if when you said, I'm going to reach out to Arno, your family and everyone else, the temple said, great idea, right?
No,
There's a lot of
most
people
were like, you're insane. They're like, they thought that I had like PTSD and all kinds of just they're like, you're going through something. And at that time, really, honestly, I was hanging out with my kids quite often. I would sleep by their beds. Oftentimes, my wife would find me, and I would. Is my?
You're good. I think.
No, I'm good now.
We're good.
Okay. So yeah, I was sleeping by the kids. I was like laying down by them, and for like hours at a time. I would hug them longer than I needed to, until the point that they'd be like, "Dad, let go of me." and oftentimes we talk about like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but I was really going through this post-traumatic growth disorder, and I knew that there was something that was pushing me that was divine. But today I enjoy it. I enjoy life more than most people, I think, do. And in a way, they're like, man, you're like inundated with heaviness. You're a trauma counselor. You hear people's tragic stories about their life and what happened to them. And I'm like, man, and I love every moment of it. Like, I just love every moment of my life. I love being here. We love spending time in Albany and Union College. And this wouldn't have happened if that didn't happen.
I don't know if you want to briefly address it, then we'll hit the last question
Sure.
about sort of your former colleagues and so forth.
An essential kind of like bit of why I got in so much trouble in the first place, because I love to piss people off. That was like my jam when I was 16 years old. I still love to piss people off. And so does Party. And that's one of the reasons we get along really well. We piss each other off plenty, that's for sure. But as we're out doing what we do and sharing our stories, there are people who are not going to respond well. And people from all over the political spectrum, all walks of life. Some people love us. Some people may hate us. But I honestly believe now that any nerves that we're touching as we share these stories that like people get really angry about, it's because those nerves need to be touched. And some views need to be challenged. And so that's what we do today, and if it gets me off of some Christmas card list, then so be it.
Excellent.
We got more friends.
Jack, your last question? We'll get a mic coming. Oh, you have it already.
I'm a follower of Jesus Christ as well, and one of my favorite verses is Proverbs 10:12, where it says, "Hatred stirs conflict, but lovers, covers all wrongs." And for you to essentially transform as a human being, Arno, I really admire that about you, and making a difference in the world today. God bless you. And, Party, we have a similar situation. My brother, 7 months ago, 11 days, passed away from a tragic heart attack at 27. And internally, I still have this anger and hatred about why that happened. And for your situation, and how do you have this compassion and love in your life? And I say any advice you have to find that forgiveness, I appreciate it.
Yeah. What's your name?
John.
John. Can everybody right now close their eyes? And I think this. Everybody just shut your eyes, if you can. And on the count of 3, I want you to say the word love in your mind, in your heart, in your spirit. Not out loud, but on the count of 3. Just say the word love. 1, 2, 3. One more time. 1, 2, 3. The voice that we just said that word love with, that voice is the voice of the conscious. That's if you think about energy and if we think about the spirit, that is, everybody said that word. But yet we had to have faith to know that everybody said that word, because it wasn't said out loud. There's not a person in here that didn't say it. That voice has no race, no identity. All it knows is that meditation on love. John, one of the things that I had to understand, and it might not make sense to you right now, is that energy doesn't die. It just transforms. When a leaf falls off a tree and falls to the ground, it is only our imagination to understand that we can use that as fossil fuel. You'll start to see things in different places, and it won't make sense to anybody else in here, and you won't even be able to explain it. And you'll just know that that's your brother.
Thank you. So I want to, I just want to thank Arno and Pardeep for coming. I want to thank you for everything you've done together. I want to thank you for this book and everything else to make the world a better place and bring light from the darkness of August in 2012. Gretchen, you want to talk about what happens next?
Sure, what happens next. John, thanks for sharing, by the way. We were with you through that whole, we grieved with you. We're going to have a lovely reception where folks can get to know each other a little bit more here. There'll be books being sold over here. Pardeep and Arno will be here signing books for those who would like their books signed. And there's also going to be a computer in the back on the book table if you want to put your name and your email to receive emails about future constructive engagement programs that we're going to be hosting in the future. And you're not a member of the union community, please feel free to do that. I also want to thank our friends from, this is a group that is actually called Clergy for Hate. They are doing a lot of work right here.
Against hate.
They're actually against hate, just to let you know. Oh boy.
Clergy for hate.
Clergy against hate. They're doing really good work in the community, stopping hate. So yeah, let's give them hands for coming. I think we're going to have a lot more of these constructive engagements, so keep an eye open, check our website. I want to thank President Harris for putting that little note in our minds during the inauguration, and now we're carrying this forward. I want to thank my new best friends. We had a blast last night for dinner. They also hung out with the students this afternoon. For the folks that are going to the workshop will begin as soon as the book signing is over, so take your time, eat a little bit over here, there's some food over there. And to remind you, I sent you the email this morning, the workshop is in Hale House in Everest. When you get over there, there'll be a sign, you'll be assigned a room, so you'll see that over there. And I thank you for coming. Any last words?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was beautiful.
Thanks.